let's move on to Luke from Portal Games, who's here to join us to talk about Monolith Arena.
Before you jump in, Luke, Chaz, you know, I said at the end of each day we need to make a correction. I need to make a correction right now.
Okay.
I was excited to hear about this game, Luke, because I love Neuroshima Hex.
Sure.
For some reason in my head, I assumed that this was in the Neuroshima Hex universe, but as you sat down and politely corrected me that this is Neuroshima Hex type mechanics, but in a different universe. So tell us all about it.
That's right. You won't be disappointed if you're a Neuroshima Hex fan, because in addition to finally having printed all 12 expansion armies all at once for Neuroshima Hex, so all the completionists can have an entire collection, we're now introducing Monolith Arena, which is Neuroshima Hex mechanics applied to a fantasy theme, and with Michał Oracz creating this incredible new totem mechanism that is going to really add a lot to the gameplay. So Neuroshima Hex applied to fantasy, meaning we have the traditional kind of fantasy factions. So you have the Dwarven Guardians, the Dark Forest with the Elves, you have the human faction, the Human Empire, and then you also have these Lords of the Abyss. So new factions, 4 completely new play styles, and now we also have these additional Monolith mechanics. So Neuroshima Hex fans can play this in the traditional Neuroshima Hex way. Also, new players to the line can play this just the way they normally play Neuroshima, where they're setting up their bases, they're doing the random draw, and they just have a great time with these factions. So the elves are focusing on movement and mobility and attacking from a distance and range. You have the dwarves here who are really good at hunkering down, and they have a lot of toughness and really powerful units. You have the human faction that has an incredible new mechanism called Charge, where they have cavalry units that they can just attack individually. They have to actually have space to move in, and then they can attack, but you can initiate combat with just for individual cavalry units as opposed to combat for the entire board. Really tricky faction to play.
Cool.
Yeah.
And that comes a lot into play because if you have modules that, for example, with this faction that is all about poisoning and blocking and interfering, if you have something like this guarding this HQ, you might actually be able to do this to where if a unit wants to charge in, he'll immediately be poisoned by this rune, as we call them. So these are now not HQs, they're banners, and now these aren't modules, these are runes, which kind of re-theming everything to the fantasy theme. So you can still play it the original way, and it's going to be a blast because you've got so many new abilities and so many new things to work with. But what we also now have is this Monolith game mode. So this is actually extremely cool. I love playing with this because what happens now is you have your Monolith, and again, this is a advanced pre-production copy, but it's still a prototype. So you've got really cool monoliths, but it's 3D printed, and all of these are still not completely finished.
Right.
But what you'll actually be able to do is insert your banner, and then before the start of the game, you will actually choose units to insert into your monolith, or runes to insert into your monolith. And then you will simply stack them. Your opponent will not know what you're putting in. And then this goes onto the board underneath your banner. So what it means now is that you can still manipulate this as you would in a normal game with movement commands. But at some point during the game now, it's up to you. You can choose to break apart your monolith in any way you want to, as long as they're connecting. And that adds a lot of control over the battlefield. You still have that random element where you're drawing 3 tiles, and that's still that chance element, but now you have so much more control over the strategies you put together, and there's so many wicked combos you can pull off of this. So this was a particularly bad one that I did because this is giving boost to range, but this unit has no range. But if I have this unit, this sorcerer, and if I have this module that is boosting range by 1, and if I insert this into my monolith, if I've broken that apart now at the right time, if I initiate a combat command, all of a sudden I'm ready to really do some damage. Better yet, if I have a rune that boosts, somewhere in here, if I have a rune that boosts this into actually a Gauss cannon, all of a sudden this becomes a unit that affects through an entire line. So after battle, all of these monoliths fold back up, and this just adds a lot of really interesting things you can do. A lot of combos you can pull off, a lot of strategies you can kind of pre-plan and have a way to control some of that random element.
All right, so I have a quick question. When you deploy the monolith, does it? You have to have the space to get it deployed?
Yes. So you do have to have the room. So that's one method that somebody has to come. If somebody comes in and blocks you off,
right.
If you don't have where to place the monolith, then you're in trouble. Also, if you're too early in the way you break out your monolith, after a combat command, everything will have to come right back in and fold up again. But if during the battle something happens, or if before the battle you have an empty space, your opponent can actually place one of their units within this if you don't have any units to place, which then when you're folding up, that makes it much more difficult. Yeah, you can still control where it's pointing, but you do have an enemy unit inside your monolith, so that's definitely not a good situation to be in.
And you said it resets after each round, so once you deploy it, it's not like I've deployed it and it's out there forever. You're going to reset and still have the ability to strategically change it around in future rounds?
So it resets after a combat.
After combat.
Yeah. So I can choose to, at some point during the round, after playing the game, I can choose to break these apart and leave them broken apart.
Yeah.
And after combat, it all comes back together. It has to.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can unfold the monolith much earlier. And if you have a strategy that's focused on runes, that's why you might want to do that. You might want to fold it out earlier.
Is there any way, like you mentioned, if one of the units in the monolith gets destroyed, you mentioned how your enemy could sneak in there. Is there a way that if you get an empty spot to get one of your own units back inside of it?
Sure. So you always have priority. Okay. So if after battle you've had your monolith spread out, unfolded, and then this unit gets taken out, battle's over, you will fold back.
Okay.
And then you know you have that empty slot. So next time you open up, as long as you have that a unit you can put in there, you have priority. But if you don't, for whatever reason, because of a bad draw, and you just really make that decision that you want to unfold, that's when your opponent can place one of his in there.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So you do have priority, so it is it's up to the strategy. If you want to do that, you can, but otherwise it's usually not a good move. So the monolith feature really adds a lot to the game, adds a lot of variety, adds a lot of strategies. We were talking back and forth when we were playing this before the convention about all the cool things we can try, all the cool combos you can have. With these charge unit, there's a module in here that gives an eternal charge to one unit. So these units are very difficult to optimize, but you have a lot of different strategy and a lot of different things you can do with this one. These units, they're completely different in playstyle, unlike anything we've had in the Hiroshima Hex universe. So,
how does the poison work? Is it like kind of a overtime effect?
Damage over time?
Exactly. So the units that attack with poison, as well as the HQ, you'll have this faction will have 5 poison tokens that they will have, only the 5, and pretty much every time there's a combat command initiated where combat starts, all the poison tokens will activate in one move to damage. So if for some reason my opponent's HQ has 5 poison tokens on it, beginning of combat, 5 hits right there.
Okay, so the poisons have like the first priority in the combat resolution.
Sure, exactly. That's the first thing that happens. But then again, you have these medics that you have a medic rune, heal rune in this game, where if I attach this to the HQ that has all of the poisons, this will take all 5.
Okay.
Because it counts as one hit. So there's different strategies. You know, if you're playing against this faction, maybe you'll want to have both of these backed up just in case. Or maybe you'll want to use this faction and keep your distance and just charge in and try to keep your HQ as far away as possible. So everything is really well balanced.
I do have a gamer question. So when you have these stacked up, and let's say that you want to unfold, but there's only one spot, can you just unfold one? And
the monolith has to unfold completely.
So if somebody can come in here and heat up and put 2 units here, and then that can't unfold at all.
Nope. Yep.
Neat.
You can lock it in.
You got that strategic.
Well, that seems like that would be
decision.
very pretty much part of the strategy too, is try to lock up a monolith to keep them being able to unfold.
But then you're getting all your units out there right next to their base or their banner, you know, and so you're kind of vulnerable to that as well. So you got that.
Some of these banners are really powerful though, so getting really close to it is not always a great move. So for example, with this faction, you don't want to be anywhere close to this because it hits poison all around and it gives poison to all of the units around it. So this is a faction you want to stay as far away from as possible. And the dwarves are really hard to get into because all of them hunker down. They have a lot of toughness. They have a lot of shields. So this is a unit that you're going to have a hard time penetrating their front line to actually make it to their banner.
Okay.
So.
And just like you mentioned, like with Hiroshima Hex, you know, every faction plays so differently with a different approach that every time that you play, you have to change your play style based on who your opponent is too. And it looks like you're carrying that concept right over to the different asymmetrical ways that each one of these factions plays as well.
Exactly.
And of course, the obvious question is, just like Hiroshima Hex, while we have all these different factions coming out, is this being designed to where you have the base game with the initial 4, but over time you can release new factions?
That's the plan. So this theme really plays into us allowing to create a lot of really cool factions, really cool expansions. So it's just such a thing that Hiroshima Hex fans have come to expect. That's definitely in the plans.
Yeah, it'd also be interesting too to see if you thought about doing like any organized play. So for having in-store tournaments and events where people can come in and basically compete in some sort of tournament, have a prize at the end.
That's definitely the case. So we Hiroshima Hex is actually having a growing tournament community going on in the States. In Europe, it's an extremely popular tournament game. So in the States, it's building, it's growing. There's been some regional tournaments, and I think Gen Con is where we're going to have the kind of national championship. So we're actually having that happen at Gen Con. So it's going to hopefully naturally transfer to this game. And it's a completely different theme that maybe if people gamers weren't into the post-apocalyptic theme of Hiroshima, this theme is maybe slightly more approachable to them, and we're hoping to open up the doors to a whole new segment of the gamer population.
Chaz, you've played Hiroshima Hex,
Yes.
right? Yeah. This is one of my all-time favorite 2-player games because I like games that are asymmetric.
Yes.
It plays quick. It's very strategic and tactical.
Yes.
At the same time. So. I was excited to hear about all the Hiroshima Hex factions coming out. That makes me happy enough, but realizing that we have a brand new style of game with a brand new theme and a brand new mechanic, I am all in. This is one of those games that where me and my co-host Tony, we can get together for lunch, we can just pull one of these out, and we can play under 30 minutes, knock out a quick game. You see, it doesn't take a lot of space. So if you've never tried Hiroshima Hex, I highly recommend trying that. And if it's one of those things, like you said, if the theme doesn't appeal to you, well, now you've got a brand new fantasy theme that's going to be coming out with a brand new mechanic. But what's cool is, like you said, you don't need to include these. You can just play a straight regular game of Hiroshima Hex rules and leave this part out.
And some of the diehard
But I don't know
fans,
that I would want to.
Yeah, not for me, but I know some diehard fans are going to get this just for the 4 new factions. It's like, it's Hiroshima Hex, 4 new factions, why not? So,
Sure, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, great. Now I want it.
Well, now for those who do want it, you said this is going to be available at Gen Con?
So, Detective, our other release is Gen Con. I'm sure you guys will be talking about that.
Yes.
This is coming around for Essen.
Essen. Okay. No, I want this for Gen Con.
So it's still got some production
Let's
going
see
on.
if I can talk to Ignacy. But
Do you know is it too early to know what the MSRP is going to be for this?
it's coming in around 50 right now.
Okay,
so.
cool. Okay, so around $50 for 4 factions aboard, and is it going to support more than 2-player? I know.
Sure. Yeah. So every faction will have its own monolith.
Okay.
Knife fight in a phone booth. If you have 4 of them and 4 monoliths going all at the same time, it's going to be hectic. But I'm imagining it'll be a lot of fun.
2v2.
Yeah. I think I like 2v2 in Hiroshima Hex just as much as 1-on-1.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that the 4-player support for it.
The rule book for this is in Polish. I don't know if I got to that section yet. I'm working through it, but I'll keep you posted.
Awesome. Well, this is so cool. It actually brings some new stuff to Hiroshima Hex between the retheming and the new mechanism stuff. So it's like, yeah, this can stand as its own thing in addition to Hiroshima Hex, which is really cool to see. Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, Luke, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Thank you so much.